The doors burst open before the butler could reach them. Lucièn Moreau wheeled himself into his own gala, and the ballroom, 500 guests, chandeliers blazing, a string quartet mid-note, went quiet by degrees like a fire losing oxygen. Not because of his entrance. Because of what his entrance represented. A man who had once walked into rooms and rearranged their gravity, now arriving in a wheelchair, 2 months after 3 bullets in a parking garage had rearranged his spine. Before we go any further, if you love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below. You do not want to miss where this goes. He was dressed impeccably. Black suit, no tie, a single platinum cufflink catching the chandelier light like something deliberate. His jaw was set, his shoulders broad, and his hands rested on the arms of the chair the way a general's hands rest on a table, with authority, not apology. But the room did not give him authority tonight. The room gave him something far worse. Pity. Men who had shaken his hand for a decade studied the floor. Women who had competed for a seat at his table suddenly found the ceiling worth examining. Only the servers kept moving because servers are paid to keep moving regardless of what is dying in a room. It was Isabel who made it worse. She appeared from the crowd in a gown the color of a bruise, and she walked toward him with the deliberate grace of a woman who has rehearsed a moment until it no longer frightens her. She had been his fiancée for 11 months. She had worn his ring, attended his meetings, occupied the particular position beside him that powerful men reserve for women they intend to keep. She was done keeping that position. "Lucièn," she said, and her voice carried, intentionally, effortlessly, across the near-silent room. "I have been thinking about the wedding." He looked at her. He had always been skilled at looking at people without returning anything. "Things have changed," she said. Her chin lifted. "I need someone who can stand beside me." Literally. A small regretful smile. "I deserve that. And so do you." She placed the ring on the arm of his wheelchair. Not in his hand. On the arm of the chair. Then she turned and walked back into the crowd, and the room absorbed the silence of 30 men who had chosen, unanimously and without coordination, to look elsewhere. 10 seconds passed. Then a glass of water appeared at his elbow. "She left the ring," said a quiet voice. "Should I return it to her or drop it in the fountain?" He turned. Amara Osei stood at his right side, charcoal service uniform, silver tray, both hands steady. She had been on his household staff for 4 months. He had categorized her the way employers categorize reliable staff. Efficiently, peripherally, without real curiosity. But now she was looking directly at him. Not with boldness, not with performance. With the plain attention of someone who saw absolutely no reason to look away. As though the wheelchair were ordinary. As though the ring on the armrest were simply an object that needed relocating. In a room full of people pretending not to see him, she was the only one who was actually looking. "The fountain," he said. Something near a smile crossed her face. "Good choice." She reached for the ring, and he watched her with the precision he usually reserved for problems that required solving. He did not know yet that she was both. "What is your name?" he asked. "Amara. You know that." "I am going to marry you," he said. The tray did not waver. She looked at him for a long measured moment, then said with total calm, "No, you are not." The murmur that swept through the ballroom began at the edges and moved inward like weather. Men exchanged glances. Someone near the bar choked audibly. Lucièn held her gaze. "Excuse me. Marriage is not a press release," she said quietly. "It is not something you announce at another person's departure to remind a room you are still here. If you ever marry me, it will be because you mean it. Not because you need witnesses tonight." She turned and walked toward the fountain, steady and unhurried, and 500 people watched her go without a single person knowing what to do with what they had just seen. Lucièn watched her too. And something in him locked since the parking garage maybe longer moved. If you want to see what she did next that had an entire empire afraid, hit that like button, leave a comment and subscribe right now. Because nothing you have seen so far will prepare you for what comes next. 3 weeks after the gala, Amara Osei was still employed. This surprised the captains. They assumed Lucièn kept her nearby because she had amused him. It did not occur to any of them that the man who had built an empire on reading people had recognized something in her that he could not yet name, and had decided to remain in its proximity until he understood it. She moved through the estate like water through a careful system, quietly, efficiently, without announcement. She arrived before the household woke. She noticed things. She spoke only when a sentence was necessary. On the 5th morning, she brought his coffee to the study. He was already at the window, reading logistics projections. She placed the tray on the desk and turned to leave. "The eastern route," he said without looking up. "What would you fix first?" She stopped. "Set the coffee pot down." "The transfer points," she said. 3 of them within 8 kilometers. "That is not redundancy, it is clustered exposure. Compromise one and the proximity of the others becomes a liability, not a safety net." He looked up. "Consolidate to 2, she said. "Stagger them by geography and time window. You lose 7% in movement efficiency. You gain 30% insulation against coordinated disruption." She picked up the coffee pot. "But you already see that. Otherwise you would not be frowning at it before sunrise." The silence between them lasted long enough to become something else. "Sit down," he said. "I have rooms to prepare." "Amara." "Quiet." "Certain." "Sit down." She sat. They talked for 90 minutes about routes, about the 3 captains whose quarterly reports were too clean to be honest, about the rival organization pressing from the south whose strategy felt, as Lucièn described it, like something designed by a committee. Careful, predictable, and therefore useful to understand. She listened more than she spoke. When she spoke, he listened more than he replied. The coffee went cold. Neither of them noticed. He called her back the following morning, and the morning after that. Within 2 weeks there was an arrangement with no formal name. She brought the coffee, he was already reading. She would sit when she was ready and they would work through whatever had claimed his attention before the world was awake. In the evenings things shifted again. She began reading to him. Not because he could not read. He consumed books rapidly. But because he had mentioned once offhandedly that he had not heard another person read aloud since his mother died when he was 19. She appeared the following night with a worn Chinua Achebe novel, and began at chapter 1 without ceremony. He said nothing. He did not ask her to stop. While she read, she worked on his legs. She had spoken quietly with his medical team, studied his injury, learned the specific therapeutic approach his physiotherapist had outlined, and had simply begun. Careful, consistent, unhurried. His physiotherapist on the next visit went still for a moment before confirming with visible surprise that the routine was exactly correct. "You are not what I assumed when I hired you," Lucièn said one evening. She turned a page. "You hired me to manage your household. I manage it very well. Everything else is additional." "Everything else," he said, "is what I cannot figure out." She looked up. Her expression was open in a way that was rare in his world. A world that ran almost entirely on concealment. "Ask me something specific," she said. "I will answer honestly or I will tell you I cannot answer. I will not lie to you." He was quiet for a time. "Why are you still here? After the gala? After what you said to me in front of all those people?" She held his gaze steadily. "Because I was not finished." She returned to the book. He let her, which was itself remarkable, because Lucièn did not let things go. He let her continue because some part of him understood that this particular thread required patience, that the wrong kind of pressure would not break her. It would only mean he never learned where she led. Meanwhile, something was shifting in the outer rooms of the Empire. A supply chain adjustment came down from Lucièn, attributed to no specific source, that outperformed 3 months of his captain's planning. A security gap that had been argued about for weeks closed quietly. A contested territory resolved without confrontation. The captains assumed it was him. It did not occur to a single one of them to look toward the woman carrying the coffee tray. That was, of course, exactly why she was effective. Captain Renault was the first to go. He did not vanish with drama. He simply stopped appearing. His chair sat empty at Thursday's strategy meeting, and when Soren, Lucien's composed and careful second-in-command, asked after him, what came back was vague. A family matter. A sudden trip. Language that had the feel of a prepared excuse without quite the texture of truth. Lucièn said nothing. 3 days later, Amara walked into the study and placed a manila folder on the corner of his desk. She did not explain it. She set it down the way she set down everything, with quiet precision, then took her usual chair and waited. He opened it. 4 months of communication records. Transaction trails. Meeting locations cross-referenced with the movements of the Southern organization Lucièn had described as predictable. Renault's name threaded through all of it with a frequency that left no room for interpretation. He had been feeding information for months. Routes. Schedules. The names of 2 men who had since disappeared on the rival side of the city under circumstances listed as unrelated. They were not unrelated. Lucièn read to the last page. He closed the folder, placed both hands flat on the desk, and sat with the particular stillness of a man absorbing something he had half suspected and fully dreaded. "How long have you had this?" he asked. 6 weeks, Amara said. He looked at her. Fully. 6 weeks. I needed a complete picture, she said. Incomplete information delivered early is more dangerous than patience. I waited until there was nothing missing. You came to me instead of acting on it yourself. It is your organization, she said simply. I do not make decisions that belong to someone else. Outside the study windows, the estate grounds held the mid-morning light. The fountain with its submerged ring. The outer wall and its cameras and guards, none of whom had noticed what Amara had been assembling inside the house they were paid to protect. Who else knows? He asked. No one. A pause. How did you access this? She gave him a patient look. I clean this house. I move through every room. People speak freely around staff because they believe staff are not listening. A brief pause. I listen. Soren appeared in the doorway that afternoon with the careful expression of a man delivering news he had not yet organized properly. Renault is unreachable. His people are. Handled, Lucièn said without looking up. Sit down, Soren. We have other things. Soren sat. He glanced once at Amara, who was refilling the water glass near the window, and looked away with the ease of a man who had never considered her relevant. That was precisely her advantage. The weeks following moved with the particular tension of a storm yet unnamed. 2 more captains received internal audits. Lucièn's initiative, worded with clinical neutrality. Both men found that things they believed were private had become uncomfortably visible. Neither was removed immediately. That was not how Lucièn operated. He collected. He confirmed. He waited for a complete picture. The captains who had privately laughed about the maid, who thought she was marrying up, laughed a little less. Not from suspicion. Simply because the air in the house had changed in a way they could feel but not locate. One evening Lucièn found Amara at the east corridor window, looking at the city below. She was still in her work clothes. The lights were coming up through the early dark, gold, amber, white. What do you want? He asked. A genuine question. She had evaded his categorization since the night of the fountain, and he needed to understand her the way he needed to understand every significant variable in his life. She did not turn immediately. What I want, she said, and what I am here for are two different conversations. Then let us have both. She turned. Her eyes met his and opened fractionally, a door ajar, not yet fully. What I want, she said, is for this city to run on something other than fear. What I am here for is more complicated. Tell me. Not yet, she said. Soon. He nodded. He understood without words for it, that she was asking for trust in the timing. And Lucièn Moreau, who had trusted almost no one and built his entire existence on information before vulnerability, chose for the first time in longer than he could honestly measure to wait. You are watching something none of them saw coming. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you think Amara is a hero or something far more complicated? Because what she reveals next will make you question everything. The file was in the basement archive, a room that existed on no shared floor plan, behind a panel in the wine storage, requiring both a code and a key. Lucièn had not entered it since the shooting, not because the chair could not manage the estate's modifications, but because the basement was where he kept the accounting of old decisions, the weight of a life constructed the way his had been. He went down alone on a Sunday morning and came back up an hour later with an expression Soren, passing through the corridor, later described as the face of a man who had just discovered the ground beneath him was different from what he believed. He went directly to Amara's room. She opened the door before he finished knocking. You knew I would find it, he said. She stepped back to let him in. Her room was spare. Books arranged by region rather than author, every object purposeful, a small framed photograph on the nightstand placed face down. He noticed it. Said nothing yet. I knew you would look, she said. When you were ready. My father had yours killed. The sentence landed between them. She did not flinch. She had lived with it for 11 years. Your father made a calculation, she said, with a precision that mattered. My father had served this organization for 19 years. He began asking questions about the Eastern Corridor arrangement. He believed this empire could be something it was not yet willing to be. He was removed for that belief. Lucièn was very still. I applied for this position 4 months before you were shot, she continued. I had spent 2 years building a picture from the outside. I needed the inside. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. When I arrived, you were already in the chair. The man I had come to understand was already somewhere else, becoming someone else. So I watched. For 4 months I watched. And I made a decision. What decision? That you might be capable of building what my father believed was possible, she said. If someone was patient enough to help you see what was rotting inside it. He picked up the face-down photograph. A broad-shouldered man in his 50s, warm-eyed, wearing the jacket of the estate's old service staff. A face he remembered faintly from a long time ago. He placed it back carefully. You could have destroyed everything I have built, he said. With what you know. Yes. Why didn't you? Because my father did not die for destruction, she said. He died believing something could be built. I came to find out if he was right. The silence between them settled into something Lucièn had no existing category for. He had navigated his entire adult life by maintaining distance from things that were not transactions. This was not a transaction. He had no armor left that applied. What do you need from me? He said. She looked almost surprised. Almost. The 3 captains your father trusted before the current arrangement. The ones who were moved to peripheral roles before your shooting. He gave her the names. She nodded, the confirmation of something long suspected. The parking garage, she said. It was not the Southern organization. He had known this. In some buried place for 2 years he had known it. No, he said. It was internal. Yes. Devereaux, she said. The name of his most senior captain. The man who had been loudest about loyalty since the shooting. Who sent fruit baskets every month. who asked after Lucien's recovery with the studied warmth of a performance so well rehearsed it had almost passed as genuine. "Devereaux," Lucièn said, quietly, with the tone of a man saying out loud what he should have said 2 years ago. "He is coordinating with the Southern Organization," Amara said. "Not as a rival. As a partner. They have been planning a second attempt for 8 months. They have chosen a location." She met his eyes. "The warehouse on Rue Calliot. They know your Thursday inspection schedule." Thursday was 4 days away. He looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who had arrived in his house carrying a silver tray, and who had been in every quiet hour since, dismantling the architecture of his enemies while he watched the city from his window. "You could have told me months ago," he said. "I needed you to trust me first," she said. "You would not have believed an incomplete picture. And you would not have trusted a stranger with a complete one." He could not argue with that. He did not try. "What do we do?" he said. For the first time she smiled fully. Not the near smile of the fountain night. A full clear smile that reached her eyes. "We keep the schedule," she said. Canceling the Thursday inspection would have told Devereaux everything. So Lucièn changed nothing that was visible. The convoy. The timing. The route. From the outside, it was identical to every Thursday that had come before it. From the inside, it had been rebuilt entirely. Amara worked through the nights that followed. She used none of the estate's internal communication channels. At least 2 were compromised, she had explained without elaborating, and instead worked through a network so quiet it barely registered as one. A driver. A woman in the city records office who had known her father. The 3 captains whose names Lucièn had given her. Men who had been waiting for exactly this opening, and who answered her call before it finished ringing. She spread a building map across the study desk on Wednesday night and marked positions with a red pen. And Lucièn watched her work with the particular attention of a man updating everything he thought he knew about the word capable. "You have built your own intelligence operation," he said. "My father had people," she said, without looking up from the map. "They became mine after he was gone. They are not soldiers. They are watchers. But placed correctly, watchers are more valuable." "How many?" She looked up. "Enough." Devereaux was in the convoy on Thursday. He did not know they knew. He performed the relaxed alertness of a man approaching a resolution, and he did it with enough skill that anyone who had not been watching him for months would have found nothing to flag. Amara was not in the convoy. She was already at the warehouse, having arrived 2 hours earlier through a service entrance absent from the building's official documentation. She moved through the structure with the unhurried certainty of someone who had studied its blueprint until it became memory. She located the 4 men positioned inside. 2 upper level, 2 near the main floor entrance, and passed coordinates through channels so low technology they were nearly impossible to intercept. Then she positioned herself in the northeast corner, with a clear sightline to the main floor, and waited. The convoy arrived at 9:14. Devereaux made his move at 9:22. A signal. A door that should have been sealed coming open. The configuration of bodies in the space shifting from escort formation to exposure. His timing was precise. His planning had been meticulous. It encountered a counter-arrangement that had been 3 weeks in construction. The men on the upper level were met before they could position. The 2 at the entrance encountered Soren's team from the wrong direction entirely. What had been designed as an ambush became, in under 5 minutes, something completely different. And Devereaux felt the temperature of the room change before the evidence confirmed it. His plan was dissolving. He could feel it the way experienced men feel structural failure. Not in one dramatic moment but in the progressive loss of things that were supposed to be solid. He turned. He scanned. And his eyes landed on Amara emerging from the northeast corner, moving toward him with a composure that enraged him more than anything else in that collapsing room. He raised his weapon. Lucièn saw it before anyone else did. What happened next took no time at all. There was no deliberation, no calculation, no weighing of consequence against outcome. There was only Amara in the line of fire and Lucien's chair crossing the warehouse floor with a speed that nobody in the room had anticipated, placing him, entirely deliberately, between Devereaux and the woman he had come to the warehouse to protect. Devereaux pulled the trigger. The first shot struck Lucièn in the chest. The second found him before the sound of the first had finished crossing the room. He did not fall dramatically. He slumped, quietly, with a kind of dignity that had no business existing in a warehouse on Rue Calliot, and the chair slowed and stopped, and the sounds of Soren's team reaching Devereaux seemed to come from somewhere very far away. Amara was beside him before her mind had formed the instruction to move. She came down to his level and her hands found him and his eyes found her face, and for a moment the entire warehouse, the shouting, the movement, Soren's voice cutting through the noise with commands, ceased to exist as anything relevant. Lucièn. His name came out of her with a steadiness that cost her everything she had. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the night of the fountain, with the full, unhurried attention of a man who had finally found something worth seeing clearly. "Did you stay?" he said, and his voice was already receding, the way a tide recedes slowly and without apology. "Because of what you came for? Or because of me?" Her eyes did not leave his. "Both," she said. "By the end, both." Something in his face settled. A tension she had not realized he was still carrying, releasing all at once, leaving behind something that looked impossibly like relief. "Build it," he said. The words cost him visibly. "What your father imagined. Build it." "Lucièn. You promised," he said quietly. "You said you would not lie to me. So tell me you will build it." "I will build it," she said. Her voice did not break. She would not let it break. Not here. Not in front of him. "I will build every part of it." He nodded once. And then Lucièn Moreau, who had wheeled himself into a ballroom and refused to be diminished, who had called out to a woman with a silver tray and meant it, who had placed himself between a bullet and the person carrying his father's debt and his own redemption, closed his eyes in a warehouse on a Thursday night, and did not open them again. The room went very still. Soren stood across the space with an expression that had no category, grief and shock and something that looked like awe, because he had watched this man for 7 years and had never once seen him act without calculation. What he had just witnessed was the one uncalculated thing. The one moment that belonged entirely to something other than strategy. Amara stayed beside him. She did not rush. She did not perform. She stayed until staying was finished, and then she stood. Shoulders back. Face composed. Eyes open and clear and carrying something in them now that had not been there before. Not hardness exactly, but a weight that had been accepted and was now being carried forward rather than set down. Every man in that room understood, without being told, that something had permanently shifted. Not just who held authority, what authority felt like, what it would demand, what it would cost. The woman who had come to clean a house was done cleaning. She gave herself one night. One night in the study, alone, lights low, the city outside doing what cities do. Moving without pause, indifferent to any single grief. She sat in her chair and she did not plan and she did not read. She simply stayed with the weight of what had happened and gave it the space it required, because she had learned from her father that grief which goes unhonored does not disappear. It moves underground and becomes harder to manage. At dawn she called Soren. "Gather them," she said. "Every captain. Every regional lead. Every person who has ever sat in a room with Lucièn and made a decision. Saturday morning. The main hall. Pause on the line." "Amara," Soren said carefully. "There are men in this organization who will not easily." "Saturday morning," she said. "Tell them it is not a request." She spent Friday quietly. A conversation with the organization's legal architect, Claude Fontaine, a woman who had operated in deliberate obscurity for years and who had, Amara had long since deduced, been waiting for precisely this reorganization with barely contained patience. A second conversation with the 3 former captains, restored that morning to active positions by documents Fontaine had prepared with smooth efficiency. Men who had waited 2 years for the right opening, and who showed up Saturday looking like people who had not wasted that wait. The main hall held 31 people on Saturday morning. It was not a comfortable gathering. These were men calibrated to a specific authority, and that authority was gone, and they were sitting in chairs arranged to face a central position that was unoccupied when they arrived. Amara walked in at 9 o'clock exactly. She was not in the charcoal uniform. She wore a deep green suit, and she walked to the central position and looked at the room and let the room look back. Nobody spoke first. That itself told her what she needed to know. Renaud is gone, she said. Devereaux is being addressed. 3 others in this room are connected to Thursday night. She looked at each of the 3, not dramatically, simply accurately, the way she looked at everything. You will each have a private conversation before the end of this week. That offer will not come twice. One of the 3 rose from his chair. Large. Loud. Accustomed to that combination functioning as a social instrument. You are a maid, he said. You have no standing to speak from that position. You have no. Captain Moreau, she said. His name in her mouth stopped him. Sit down. He did not sit immediately. He stood with his jaw tight, broadcasting the specific fury of a man realizing too late that the ground has moved beneath him. She waited with the patience she had always had, the patience that had allowed her to spend 4 months in a house, carrying trays, listening, building what none of them had seen coming. He sat. I do not need your approval of my position, she told the room. My position is not a title I am requesting. It is a fact that has already occurred. The question for each person in this room is straightforward. Do you want to be part of what this empire becomes, or part of what it was? She let that land. Lucièn spent 2 years trying to move this organization towards something he was not ashamed of. He was consistently undermined from inside this room. I will not be making the same errors in the same directions. Soren, seated to the left, was running very large calculations behind very still eyes. The conversations that followed through that week were private and conclusive. Morals emerged different in tone from how it entered. The other 2 produced decisions that closed chapters of the organization's story that had been open and damaging for years. What came after was not a revolution in the dramatic sense. Empires turn the way ships turn. Slowly, with enormous invisible effort, the movement only apparent from a distance. Amara worked through the legal structures first, then operational ones, then personnel. She did not dismantle the empire. She had never come to dismantle it. She had come to prove that what her father believed was possible was not wrong, only early. The city felt it before it could name it. Certain arrangements that had operated as extraction quietly became something else. Certain protections became reliably actual. The organization's conversations with the city's other institutions shifted in character. Not soft, Amara was not soft, but different. And different was enough to produce the kind of whisper that cities generate when the power beneath them has genuinely changed hands. 3 months later, Soren heard it for the first time at an external meeting. A man who had been skeptical of the transition and had since revised his position thoroughly, delivering a single sentence that he brought back to Amara as a report and watched her face to receive. The underworld was no longer whispering Lucien's name. She was at the study window when he told her. The same window. The east corridor view of the city her father had believed in. She received the information the way she received everything, with attention without performance. Good, she said, and returned to her work. That night she stood on the balcony above the city lights. Gold and amber and white, the permanent restless illumination of a city that does not know who watches from above. She stood with her hands on the railing and she thought about her father, and she thought about a man who had placed a wheelchair between her and a weapon without one moment of hesitation, and she thought about the conversations in that study before the rest of the world was awake. Below her, the underworld whispered her name. She had not come for the name. She had come for what the name confirmed, that her father's belief had not been wrong. Only waiting for the right person to make it real. They said Lucièn Moreau had married beneath himself the night. He called out across a silent ballroom to the woman with the silver tray. They had not understood what he saw, that she was not showing anyone. Not a maid. Not a replacement for a woman who had dropped a ring on the arm of a chair and walked away satisfied with herself. Something that had nothing to do with what she carried, and everything to do with where she was going. They thought he married beneath him. They didn't realize he married above his own ambition. If Amara's rise left you speechless, if you never saw this coming, drop a comment right now and tell me the moment that hit you hardest. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who walked into a room carrying a tray and walked out carrying an empire. See you in the next one.